Hello, I'm Francis Terry. I'm a classical architect who specialises in country houses. And today I'm with Martin Leay, who is a planning consultant. And he also specialises in country houses. And we're going to be talking about NPPF paragraph 84E. This is a piece of legislation which allows you to build a country house in open countryside. It is an exception clause because that generally isn't allowed. And the reason it came about is because there was a feeling in the late 90s that the country house tradition, which spans way back to the Tudor period through the Georgians, into the Victorians and into the modern era, was going to end due to planning restrictions. So John Gummer set up this law that you could build a country house if it was exceptional. And exceptional is obviously a debatable term. There are three basic characteristics which you need to satisfy. The first is it has to be truly outstanding. The second is it has to significantly enhance its immediate setting. And the third, it needs to be sensitive to the defining characteristics of the local area. Now, I'm with Martin here to really dig deep into the clause by clause exactly what's meant by this legislation, because it is incredibly important because it allows people to have a house in a place where you couldn't before, where exception clauses don't work. So Martin, let's unpick this in detail.
Yes. And it's interesting that it's just 27 years since the Gummer PPG 7 clause came in. At that time it had to be a large country house, and that's gone. And then through the various national planning policy framework clauses, which have evolved from Para 55, 79, 80 and now 84E. Basically it's the same except for two things. It used to be that your house could be exceptional architecture and truly outstanding or innovative. So in other words, you could have a house that looked like a spaceship, but if it was innovative, it might qualify. Innovation alone is now no longer a criterion that will get you over the line, even though government welcomes innovation. And no longer does it have to be a large country house. So our successes have been very much with medium to large, probably 8 to 16,000 square foot houses. And as you say, there's certain criteria which have to be satisfied, and it's a high bar.
Very high bar.
A very high bar, and that's right, because if it's going to continue the great English tradition of country houses, we only want to see architecture that will stand the test of time.
I think the idea is that these will be the listed buildings of the future. Yes. These are the buildings which people will visit who are interested in architecture. Should we go through it clause by clause? Yeah. The first one is that it has to be of exceptional quality. And Martin and I have often worked together on these schemes. And this is to do with the quality of the design through to the delivery and the supervision. I mean, I don't know whether that you'd like to add something to that. What have you noticed that what the planners are looking for?
Yes.
Or
I think increasingly the planners have become more and more demanding as to what they expect to see, because a lot of planning authorities don't like this clause very much.
No.
For two reasons. One, they're meant to protect the countryside, and secondly, they always feel, oh well, if you get this one, will that open the floodgates for others?
Yes.
And also, it's the local authorities don't have the resources and always the skills to be able to truly assess not just the architecture, but the landscape, the ecology, the sustainability credentials, the biodiversity.
I mean, we have had cases where planners have said, we need this assessed by an independent body, which is fair enough. It isn't really in their remit.
No, but I think to answer the question, to be of exceptional quality, you must have great design, you must have the right materials, linked to whether it's sensitive to the defining characteristics. It's got to be a house that reflects the local area, but isn't a copy. But then also now the implementation and the detail, and something I've emphasised with clients and councils and with your own team, is that you can have a beautiful looking design with a beautiful watercolour, but the way in which the stonework, the brickwork, the joints, the plaster moulding, the detailing, that's where you truly show the house is beyond the norm.
Yes, and I think that planners don't want to feel, when they give them permission for one of these things, that someone has just knocked up some sort of badly built, kind of rubbishy building, and then they sort of say, well, why did you do that? Yeah. And I think increasingly they want evidence that you're going to build this with exceptional quality.
And then, of course, we find within the National Planning Policy Framework, NPPF, that there's a clause that says council should take into account the views of a design review panel. So we have been to Design South East and the Traditional Architecture Group, where, as it were, an independent body, including architects, landscape architects, sustainability specialists, heritage specialists, they review and are often part of the evolving process. So you might come up with a design for a pre-application consultation with the council. We go before a review panel, they make suggestions, some we like, some we don't, but it gives it greater rationale.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way that comes to our second point, which is really the kind of kernel of paragraph 84, which is the building needs to be truly outstanding. And I think in a way, exceptional quality, you could sort of argue that could be done by quite a lot of firms, but truly outstanding, I think it's a very difficult one for planners because it is very subjective. But the way I view it is that each house I do, actually, whether it's this or not, or 84 or not, I view it as a work of art, and that each one is an individual piece where we've considered the locality, we've considered the wider landscape, and there'll be a story about the house that it's not one we've just gone, oh, country house, great, we can just churn this one out. Each one is very specifically designed.
And I think truly outstanding also isn't just, does it look lovely, has it got amazing materials and amazing craftsmanship and all the details, but when you compare it with other houses of national renown, often listed buildings, in what way can you show that the essence of the house is derived from the very best, the very, very best of classical architecture, whether that goes back to inspiration from Palladio or other 18th century houses or some of the great estates. And so you're showing that you're head and shoulders above good houses, of which there are many, traditional and new. And that truly outstanding quality now, given that we're addressing the climate emergency, I don't think you can have a wonderfully designed house that isn't sensitive to energy consumption, materials, and some councils are very demanding on this. West Oxford District Council, where we've had successes, they have key performance indicators about the house, and now we've been working on what we trust will be the first passive house, which is where a house is completely carbon neutral, so it does not take from the environment in terms of its energy. And so whether you have a truly efficient house in terms of heat loss, so the materials you use, that you address thermal bridging in dormer windows, you use ground source heat pumps, you maybe use solar panels, maybe not on the roof of the house, but we've done it on several projects in a discrete area behind hedges where it won't be seen. So addressing that has been a new challenge for classical architecture, but you've demonstrated that you don't have to dilute the quality of the architecture to incorporate these measures.
Yeah, I mean, interesting that I think that the desire to be sustainable aligns with a lot of the modern clients' intentions, both in terms of trying to keep the cost of running a building low, but also from a kind of ethical point of view. So that, that's something we all welcome. I think it's interesting that innovative, as you touched on earlier, is not part of is taken out of this clause. And I think that was because people would do something innovative and exciting, but then it would fail. And then so these environmental things, they would try something new, it would fail, and then it would perform worse environmentally than a normal building.
I mean, take an extreme example. It was innovative to build a house out of straw bales, and that could be very thermally efficient, lined with sheep's wool. But is that going to stand the test of time? Well, probably not. It won't last for that long.
Well,
Whereas
so fire.
the great thing with classical materials is that if needs be, they are recyclable.
Yes.
So we're not using nearly as much concrete or steel, but we're using more timber construction, and stone and brick is a natural material.
Yes, and I think that quite often I've argued that something traditional is more sustainable, and the fact that I'm drawing from historic buildings and saying this was done in the past when the use of fossil fuels wasn't available, that all helps establish whether a building is truly outstanding. You can be reviving a way of building.
So what we've done there, we've covered sort of exceptional quality and being truly outstanding, which then together combine with the third requirement that the design reflects the highest standards in architecture.
Yes.
And we're now saying we believe that has to include high sustainability credentials.
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, really, those two overlap. I think one thing I'd add to that is the architect's statement that goes into the design and access statement for the planning documents has to be of the highest quality. And it's sort of no good just say this is a nice house or whatever. You need to really sort of dig deep and do a very scholarly architect statement, often with advice from specialists to demonstrate the level of what you're doing.
And with those, we often work with people who carry out an architectural peer review, people like Jeremy Musson, former architectural editor of Country Life.
Yeah.
And he will, with you, often tour a local area and look at perhaps the best 20, 30 buildings, listed buildings, not always just houses, but architectural treatments of churches or public buildings. And then in a way, I always sort of feel that the two of you sort of synthesize all that's best locally, and then you use your creative skill to reinterpret that, obviously meeting a client's brief, because an 18th century house does not have the same layout internally as we design today, because the way we live, and it's very important that it's not just the externals of the house.
No, sure.
It's the internals, the flow and the connection, and also how that then connects to the outside spaces, the immediate garden and the uses of that, and then how it sits in the wider landscape. And we'll come on to that in a moment when we talk about enhancing the setting.
Yeah, absolutely. And this naturally runs on to how the new proposal will help raise standards of architecture more generally in rural areas. And that, I guess, inevitably, if you do a very good work of architecture, that will help people see that these things are possible. It will also help craftsmen who are in sort of dying crafts like flint work and so on. But there's also things like scholarships, which you can give to local craftspeople as well.
Yes. And we've involved apprenticeship schemes within our new country houses, and we've involved them being used as an exemplar with architectural students. And also, as you say, the craftsmanship skills, which are often only used to repair buildings. If young apprentices are coming on and learning those skills, they will use them for new country houses, but also for the repair work that is also needed on traditional build. So I think demonstrating how all of that comes together from the design to the implementation stage and sharing that. I mean, some people have set up a website to record the build process, the apprenticeship schemes, open days, articles, letting other people visit the site to see. I think all of that then shows that this isn't just a house for a private individual, although of course it will be a private house, but the benefits of the process permeate through the wider areas of design.
Yeah, I mean, also that has happened historically. So, for example, around Blenheim Palace, there was a tradition that lasted for over 100 years of people who worked on Blenheim and met Vanbrugh and Hawksmoor and trained with them, and that developed its own little tradition locally. So, in a way, we're kind of reproducing that instance. I mean, I think all these points, the exceptional quality, truly outstanding, help raising the standards of architecture, in a way, to me, that is about exceptional quality. And I categorize that as kind of one. And the second thing, which I mentioned in the introduction, is to significantly enhance the immediate setting. In a way, you could have an exceptional building, but does it significantly enhance the immediate setting, which is a very different question.
Yes, and my starting point with clients is, of course, get excited about selecting an architect of national renown and somebody really experienced in doing these things, because working at this high bar level is not like designing a beautiful replacement dwelling.
Sure.
And my starting point is the land in question. Will a house fit there? Will it sit? Will it nestle? When it's built, will it look as if it always belonged there? But also the significant enhancement has to be of the landscape. So our starting point is working with other landscape professionals. How has this landscape fared over the last 200 years? And not just the site itself, but perhaps for 5 kilometres around. And often you find the level of woodland has been decreased by 80%. The number of hedgerows lost measures miles and miles, kilometres. Species-rich grassland has been ploughed up for arable. Farm ponds, farm orchards, estate trees, there hasn't been enough replanting. So very much working in line with the defining landscape character area. The whole of the country is in one of many, many landscape character areas. So to take an obvious example, downland landscape with chalk is very different from parkland landscape, or for the Somerset levels and their wetlands. So when your house fits, the significant enhancement of the landscape will involve most likely tree planting, hedgerow planting, species-rich grassland, maybe creating wetland habitat, certainly new hedgerows, linkages off-site to other wildlife sites, all of it appropriate for the landscape, and increasingly with biodiversity net gain.
Yes.
And this is something we've been working on more.
Certainly the significant enhancement starts with the landscape and the policy relating specifically to that piece of land, whether it's, as you say, wetland or whatever else. The other very important aspect of this is can that landscape be improved? And I think you have to think of before and after. So, for example, if you have a site which has a lot of concrete, maybe it was a light industrial unit or a kind of factory farming place or whatever it is, you could look at that, and actually when we go to sites, we look at it and think, yes, we can significantly enhance that. I think if you go to the most Arcadian valley imaginable, and you want a house there, we sort of think, well, can we really significantly enhance that?
But I think this is where the new regulations, it's now been introduced that apart from some small-scale development, all new development must deliver at least 10% biodiversity net gain. And this is measured on a range of habitat types and hedgerow units. So even a very attractive landscape, you can often find that the grassland has been overgrazed or fertilised, and often the woodlands haven't been managed that well, and the understory isn't that great, and the hedgerows have become gappy because maybe they're relying on electric fences rather than stock hedges.
Yes.
And so we're finding, even in an AONB, and I've got a case running at the moment down in Berkshire, even in the AONB, there is potential to put back lost landscape features and not just enhance habitats and wildlife corridors by 10%, but by 30, 40, 50, 60 or more. And I think then you can go to a council and say, we will deliver significant enhancement because it's as much about the biodiversity as about the visual.
Yeah.
And that's going down well with councils and conservation officers. And the combined elements of landscape and biodiversity enhancement will be delivered in what we call a LEMP, a Landscape and Ecology Management Plan. That's a document that sets out what you've got, how you're going to improve it, how you're going to manage it for a minimum of at least 25 years. And that document is then binding on your proposal, and it can be covered by way of planning condition or a legal agreement. And certainly we can demonstrate that all of those measures go way beyond any other expectation of enhancing the countryside setting.
Yeah, and I actually think for people who live locally to one of these potential sites, that's the thing that's going to excite them most.
Yes.
That suddenly there's more owls, there's more squirrels, there's more, all of that.
Yeah. And most of our sites have a rights of way network, if not across them, within close proximity. So people will be aware of what's happening with the house. There may be some concerns about how much construction traffic will there be noise, will there be light pollution, and we address all those things. But to be able to demonstrate that that environment will be enhanced with all those wildlife benefits, I mean, that's a great educational resource for school visits. We all feel good about ourselves when we're doing our bit for the environment. And I think linking it to a beautiful new outstanding country house is a great combination.
Sure, and I think how many, in a way, if you're doing say a housing estate with volume house building, you don't really have the luxury of a huge amount of land to do these implementations of allowing.
You don't. And it doesn't always have to be a huge amount of land. Where I live in Gloucestershire, and there's a case quite near us, and it's in a 4-acre wood. And they built a house on stilts in the wood, not designed by you, and not to everyone's taste, but enhanced management of the woodland, the understory, replanting was deemed to deliver those enhancements. Elsewhere, we've had hundreds of acres, and we've taken a very broad brush approach, still for the countryside to be productive, to have some farming. It's not always a parkland landscape. In Wiltshire, our examples, have included the much wider downland style of landscape,
Sure.
but still the ability to deliver enhancement of landscape features and habitats.
Yeah, and this comes to the final criteria, which is being sensitive to the defining characteristics of the local area. This we've done a number of times, and I'm hugely sympathetic to this, and I almost feel that I wish all planning had this clause in it.
Yes.
So it's to do with making sure that the Cotswolds still looks like the Cotswolds in a few decades' time. So the use of stone and the use of Cotswolds details. Essex is more red brick and timber. Wiltshire and Hampshire are more flint and brick. And it's really trying to get that spirit of the local area through. And when I do these schemes, I will do a little tour, perhaps with Jeremy Musson, who I mentioned earlier on, and we really drill down and we look at the character of that specific area and the traditions that have gone on. It's quite a pleasurable aspect of the design, I find.
And there is, of course, an exception to that approach, because historically, very often, wealthy people building a house brought in higher quality materials to demonstrate their taste and their wealth. And if you remember, we got consent for a house in Norfolk,
Yes.
which was predominantly brick.
Yes.
The local area is
Yeah.
predominantly brick and some flint.
Yeah.
But some higher order buildings, some churches, some public buildings
Yeah.
were stone. The
Yeah.
client wanted a stone house.
Yes.
And the planners said, we would support it in brick, but we don't feel stone is sensitive to the defining
Yes.
characteristics.
Yes.
And we were able to show that this pattern that historically high quality materials were brought in
Yeah.
in order to elevate and to be an exemplar and to stand out,
Yes.
to be exceptional,
Yes. Yes.
can still work. Now, you won't ever be able to build a brick house in the stone Cotswolds, but I think you're very good at saying, well, let's use some of the local stone as dressing material if we are doing a brick house, or vice versa.
No, I mean, I think on the Norfolk case, we were very lucky, and that's not something I would encourage a client to go down. I think in a way, the best result is if you're true to the spirit of paragraph 80. So if you want a stone house, go to the Cotswolds. Or there has been traditions of dragging stone around the country. For example, from Bath to Reading, there was a canal where Bath stone came in. So if you want to build in Berkshire, you can do a stone house. There's an awful lot of stone in Reading, strangely enough. And so, you know, that we when we do one of these schemes, we really dig down and look at the traditions. I mean, that is a kind of interesting case because it isn't local to the area, but because it's been done for so long, it has a natural affinity with the local area.
And I think, as well as us talking about these things, the examples we're showing of houses that just look wonderful, but it's not just do they look wonderful, can you demonstrate how you got to that design and how it answers all of these NPPF Para 84E criteria?
Yes, I mean, there's a lot in the architect statement and the design and access statement that really shows this. I mean, part of the reason why this is such a high bar and it's such a massive undertaking is because you need lots of reports, lots of involvement.
You do.
And I suppose this now comes to how one implements this. In a way, I would not encourage people to do a paragraph 84 scheme because it's not for the faint-hearted.
Yes, I disagree with you because I think although it don't encourage people who aren't up for it. It takes more time.
Sure.
You certainly need a six-figure budget, but you don't have to commit to that money all at the outset. At the outset, we can visit the site. I can give an overview on whether the land is suitable for enhancement. You do your taster days to give an idea of a sketch scheme.
Yes.
But what I would also say, yes, we will produce probably reports from 10 different consultants covering all the disciplines. But at the end of the day, planning officers are really busy. They may want to take it to committee. So it's no good just having those reports. And what my firm has specialised in, working with the great talent of your team and other teams, is to produce these presentation summaries that as a folding document every member of a council can have at a planning committee, and it tells the story. It's beautifully illustrated. We confirm we're policy compliant. We review these tests from the NPPF, and then you've presented it in a way that everybody can understand. And your watercolours, for example, not just a perspective of the house, but some of the details are so important to demonstrate the exceptional quality, the detail of the design. How it works, we introduce the project on the front page, usually having a quote from somebody like Jeremy Musson, the peer review. It opens up. We describe the site as existing, the site context. We then illustrate the landscape proposals, some of Francis's beautiful drawings, some detailing, the house, the wider landscape setting. Here we've got a before and after watercolour. And then on the back page, we've talked about the site selection, and then we talk about sustainability, energy efficiency, and anything else in particular. So these presentation summaries, loved by councils, loved by planning officers, because they tell the whole story. And in fact, working with Francis, we did one of the first ones was at Tedworth for Help for Heroes. And the chief planner said to me, the great thing about this is I can show it to the leader of the council. In 3 minutes, we can get it.
I mean, I think most people won't dig down and read the whole lot.
I think I'm the only one who reads all the documents.
And I think that this is incredibly useful for the planners, for people who are slightly involved and they just need to know about it.
So it is a tall order.
I mean, I suppose what I would say, and I'm sure you'd agree with this, that if there's any other way of getting permission for that house, go for that instead. So always look to see whether you could do this as a replacement dwelling. That would be my number one thing. And then paragraph 84 is very much the last resort if you're on for the scale of investment and the energy that you'll need to do it.
But the limitations of a replacement dwelling is that generally it can't be more than 30% bigger. Although we have had success of knocking down ugly, redundant, intrusive former farm buildings that look industrial in scale, and therefore we've been able to balance the benefits of removing those to allow for a larger house. So I think NPPF is a wonderful opportunity, not for the faint-hearted, and you've got to be really committed to not just the professional fees, but the build costs, using the finest materials, ensuring the greatest level of energy efficiency, ensuring the landscape. You have to want to do it. And then when you do, and the satisfaction of seeing it built, then it all makes it worthwhile.
No, I mean, absolutely, because very often it's an issue of no house or a house.
Yes.
So it is your only way for a lot of sites.
And often it's in a setting that is just so wonderful that the views, the context, the landscape around you, if you can achieve the house, then it's just worth it.
Yeah, I mean, it is on the statute books for a reason.
Yeah.
It's not impossible. We've had a lot of successes.
Lots of successes
over the years.
Yeah.
So I think do it if the site requires it, but it is expensive.
It is.
And quite time consuming.
And you need the appetite and the belief in your team, because you as the potential owner, you are the champion of this process. And every great English country house historically had a champion, had somebody who wanted to build it, who was interested in the architecture, was interested in the house layout as a family home, and as something to be proud of for future generations.
Sure, absolutely.
So if I think from today, as you can tell, we're very enthusiastic about this in the right circumstances. We're always happy to give initial advice on the site or the design approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think that point you made is that the cost is huge if you go the whole way. But what we do is as a first instance, we would come to the site, both of us, and we'd have a look round and we'd kick around ideas, and that would just be paid for on a day rate, so not a huge amount of money. And that's when Martin and I would say, actually, this isn't the right site, or you're very good at this, and I'm amazed at your boldness, but you will just say, yes, we can do this one, and I'm thinking, that is a bold claim, but you do that. Or sometimes you say it's 50-50, and then the client has to make the judgment whether they. But again, it's not you're not into kind of huge amount of money until it goes stage by stage. Like you might say it's 50-50. I need to investigate this further. And then you investigate it further, and you will do a pre-app, and you think actually this one is not right. This one won't work. Or then the client may say, I'm not actually prepared to go the whole hog and do the full investment.
Or the client has said, I want a 16,000 square foot house, and we feel that's just too big for that particular site. But sometimes if they've got more land, we can say, actually, here the house wouldn't fit quite well, but a bit down the valley where you've got some lovely views as well, we feel a larger house. Or we could say, well, the main house can be of a certain size and room heights and scale, and then ancillary elements will step down and help the house to sort of sit and nestle within its landscape setting. Yeah.
So in summing up, I think that if you've listened to all this and you haven't been too put off by the scale of investment and the general upheaval, we'd love to get involved. And I think, as I said before, we'd start off by just both of us visiting the site on a day rate. And I do a taster day, which is on my website, where I spend a day looking at the site and then drawing a sketch scheme. And that can be enough to get initial advice about whether what you actually want is possible, and then we develop it from there.
And we can also show you other examples, many examples of our work that have been successful.
Yes.
And we can describe that process to you. And we've both got clients who are more than happy to talk about that process that they went through to achieve their dream home. And for the right people in the right place with the right desire to have a beautifully classically inspired house, we would love to help. I would say it's about bringing aspiration to reality.
Absolutely.
Fulfill the vision.
Thank you very much.